Vice President J.D. Vance sounding a bit more cautiously optimistic today in Switzerland. Here's what he told reporters during a break in the talks.
The opening of the Strait of Hormuz, the ending of the Iranian nuclear program, all of these things have already been accomplished. The question before us now is how much more can we accomplish together? Can we turn over a new leaf? Can we change relations in the Middle East permanently? Or do we go back to doing things the old way, which is not our preference, but is certainly very much something that can happen.
Let's bring in Dr. Jake Sotiriadis, national security strategist and former Air Force intelligence officer. Does the vice president have some rose-colored glasses on when he says, you know, we want to turn over a new leaf in relations with Iran?
Hey, John, thanks for having me. Look, I think we're at a point now where we have to understand the regime with which we're negotiating right now. So when we say we want to bring Iran back into the community of nations, there's a huge problem with that because Iran's identity itself is built on fighting the United States. It's built on a radical Islamic revolution. And that ideological power network of the people, elites, and institutions in Iran almost guarantees that Iran would have to change itself fundamentally if that were going to happen. So I'm not optimistic that that can happen. And look at their activity over the last few days. Even though they're being allowed now to sell their oil back on the markets, they're threatening again to close the Strait of Hormuz. As the report just talked about, the U.S. Navy is going to try to prevent that from happening. But look, if you analyze this as a network, ideology trumps rationality every time here, and that's what we're dealing with Iran.
I wonder, you know, whether this 60-day window that's going to be opened, you know, to nail down all of the strategic issues, is that really just 60 days in which the Iranians can stall and push us closer to the November midterm elections?
I think that is an important point that you just mentioned. It's clear that the Iranians have not been negotiating in good faith. Their desire here is to drag things out as much as possible. I mean, that's the history of our entire negotiating framework with Iran. They've always stalled. They've always come to the table with another agenda. And we're really at the beginning of this whole process, right? The 60 days are essentially trying to get us to a more permanent deal. So what we are right now is we're not at a grand bargain. We have issues like nuclear verification, the enriched uranium, the permanent status of the Strait of Hormuz. The Iranians today talking about the fact that they are going to charge tolls even after the 60-day period, that Iran will develop a nuclear program. So a lot of these are irreconcilable issues. And then you add in the Israel piece with operations in Lebanon and Iran's proxy support. And I think you can see that they are trying to drag this out and also gain leverage in the court of public opinion, global public opinion.
Michael Waltz is the UN ambassador. He says, you know, people who are doubting that this Trump deal, this proposal has teeth, are getting it wrong. Listen.
Those same folks that were cheering on the Obama deal, Obama and Biden never backed diplomacy with a credible military use of force, like President Trump is doing and has done. So they can doubt all they want, but this is the path that the American people elected Donald J. Trump to put us on, and he is looking to actually solve these problems, whether it's Gaza, Venezuela, Cuba, or Iran's obsession with the nuke.
Would you agree that the Obama efforts to come to a peace deal with Iran relied on good intentions on the part of the Iranians and didn't really have any substance, any teeth to them?
I think we're talking about apples and oranges in terms of the two different deals right now, John. So when you look at where we are at this point, I go back to what I said before, which is that this is really the beginning of negotiations for a permanent deal. President Trump, no doubt, has demonstrated the power of American deterrence. He has weakened Iran's military considerably, weakened their missile forces, their drone capacity, destroyed the Iranian Navy. So I think from that perspective, the United States does have leverage militarily, and there's no question that President Trump has put on the table that he would return to military action again if we can't get to where we need to in the negotiations. But having said that, I think we have to be circumspect about what we're dealing with. Iran itself is not an individual. It's an ideological power network, and that requires a strategy to actually weaken the elements of that network, the relationship between the population, elites, and the institutions. And that is going to require, I think, deft diplomacy backed by hard military power. And we're going to see how far we can take that. Hopefully, we can get to some permanent resolution within these next 60 days.
Well, talking about hard military power, when we launched this war more than 3 months ago, 3.5 months ago, that opening strike took out the Ayatollah and so much of the Iranian leadership. I think a great many people were thinking, hey, this is the chance for a new government in Iran, a new type of government. There won't be this radical theocracy anymore. That doesn't appear to have happened. Why?
Well, this is a great question. And I think if you look at the actions of both the American and Israeli militaries at the time, you don't assassinate and decapitate the leader of a country like Iran if your objective isn't regime change. So I think it's pretty clear that the opening weeks of the campaign were doing just that. They were trying to create regime change in Iran. That didn't work, however, because as we've seen, decapitation is not necessarily the same as regime change when you're talking about a system and a network the way Iran has been set up. Now, the IRGC, the most hardcore elements of the Iranian regime, are in power in Tehran. And this is, for them, the ultimate showdown. This is the struggle they have been waiting for their entire lives since 1979. All of them today, those 12 generals in charge at the IRGC in Iran, are veterans of the Iran-Iraq War. And so they see this now as an opportunity to take action. They criticized the previous regime for not being decisive enough. And what they're seeing is they're expanding the conflict broadly into the Middle East, striking the Gulf partners in the Middle East, and closing the Strait of Hormuz. They see that that actually brought them tangible results.
Dr. Jake Sotiriadis, thanks for your analysis today. We appreciate it.
Thanks for having me.
You bet.
Be sure to like and subscribe for all the Fox News latest on YouTube and catch full shows streaming now on Fox One.